Welcome back, guys. How you doing, man? Somewhere in between the bright lights and the shadows they cast lies the truth. And this show is a mix of conspiracy and history with a dash of murder and mystery. Plus, we're going to try to make it a little funny along the way. Welcome back to Bright Lights and Scary Shadows. Now, first, we got some updates going on, and that is that we got some new artwork for the show. Yes, and it looks fucking awesome. Second up is the Instagram page. We're going to be adding a bunch of promo art there and some tasty memes, so make sure you follow us over there at brightlights_scary shadows. Next, we have a YouTube up now, so you can pull up all the episodes there, as well as play all the fake sponsor commercials. Just head over to YouTube after the show, hit that sexy little subscribe button, and all will be right in the world. And make sure you like the page over on Facebook too, so you stay up to date with all the upcoming shows, events, and random shit that I might post, right? And also, don't forget that you can reach out to me personally on Facebook and Twitter at WantSomeSpook. In other news, we hit 100 downloads in the first month. Fucking awesome. Thank you guys so much for all your help and support in making that happen. I'm glad that there's a few people out there that actually like the show and want to hear my bullshit. Now, we took a short break to work out some things on the show, and I gotta say, I'm really happy with where we stand right now. Still, we need your help. Like and share the show as much as you can, or may the gods be with your soul as I send the almighty Cthulhu upon your homes and make you repent for your insolence. No, seriously though, every little bit does help, and it really means a lot to me as well. So if you're sitting at home in this quarantine and you feel like doing a good deed that's free, you can just hook us up with a like and a share. It's simple, it's easy, and it's free, and it makes you a better person. So don't be a douchey McGillicuddy and help us out with those beautiful little fingers and some mouse clicks, all right? Now, next, I was going to start with the Terror Papers for this episode, but I think Atlantis is a much better place to start, since it'll make the Terror Papers make a lot more sense, in a way, anyway, right? Plus, this weirdly hits a bunch of the things that we've already gone over to this point, so you're going to hear a lot of familiar shit. As usual, though, thank you so much for being here with me today, and let's get into episode 6 of Bright Lights and Scary Shadows. The lost city of Atlantis. Was it real? Was it just a myth? Was it just Plato fucking around with theater? Well, today we're going to try to narrow it down, or at least the best that we can, right? So how does a myth live on for thousands of years and not be edited, right? That was the first thing I started to think of while I was doing the research. Every other tale on this planet seems to grow and become this outlandish thing and seeded throughout, all the different cultures. Yet Atlantis seems to be laser etched in adamantium, as in it doesn't really change. Its story is and was, and that is it. Now, the main story seems to have remained relatively intact over the centuries, but there are two versions of the story, and spoiler alert, they both end with Atlantis taking a long fucking walk off of a very short pier. Now, the differences in between the two narratives is A, location, and B, advancement. One version tells of Atlantis in this place that's surrounded by water on all sides, inaccessible unless by ship in a time when ships themselves did not exist. And then it gets deeper, right? Because supposedly these were some hyper-advanced people that had flying ships and were at their civilization's peak. And then others tell a tale of a city very much accessible by land with biblical ties, and all these people were just advanced in terms of tradesmanship and civil engineering and shit, So which is true? Are any of them true? Is any of this true? The archaeological and historical societies say no, but fuck those asshats, because they wouldn't know where their cock was unless someone else found it first. Or Lady Bean. I do want to be inclusive here on BLSS, but in my humble opinion, academic ignorance knows no gender. As of today, Atlantis lives on, despite the community at large saying that it's horseshit. So why do so many people even think it's real? And I think a good point to make here is that if it was real, it wasn't called Atlantis. That's just a name that we attach to this place that we know seems to have existed somewhere in antiquity in the Atlantic Ocean. Hence, Atlantis. In our time, the story of Atlantis is deep-rooted in our fiction, and so much has been written about it in the past 100 years. The great J.R.R. Tolkien wrote about Atlantis. When Tolkien wrote about Numenor, he was directly referencing Atlantis and the Atlanteans. In the Silmarillion, Numenor gets swallowed whole by the ocean just like Atlantis. And Aragorn Elessar, the King of Kings, was a direct descendant of Numenor or Atlantis. However, Tolkien's good friend C.S. Lewis also referenced the Atlanteans many times. Lewis is the guy that wrote Uncle Touchy's Naughty Closet that makes you disappear. No, he wrote about Narnia and stuff, but they were both firm believers in Atlantis and its place in mythical history. Lewis came out of the closet with his work, and Tolkien went more the route of Plato and wrote Atlantis into his works, right? Even Jules Verne mentions Atlantis in one of the most well-known literary works ever in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then in 1939, Marvel Comics' official first superhero was Prince Namor of Atlantis, and DC was quick to follow suit with Aquaman as well, and the two together formed the ambiguously gay duo. Now, in terms of moving pictures, there is a lot, but it starts with Undersea Kingdom in 1936, where Unga Khan tries to take over Atlantis. And then there's Cocoon, where the space fuckers forgot the Anunnaki eggs on Earth. There's Journey to the Center of the Earth, where they find Atlantis under Earth's crust. And then there's Stargate Atlantis, where they beat a dead horse with a stick. And so much more. Even one of my favorite cartoons as a kid, scratch that, many of my favorite cartoons as a kid, all went to Atlantis, but the Centaurians, for one, I fucking love the Centaurians, dude. Anybody remember the Centaurians? I feel like they're a totally forgotten franchise, but I fucking love the Centaurians. The Transformers had an Atlantis allegory. Even one of my other ones, right? I mentioned in one of the past episodes, the Visionaries. The Visionaries, masters of mystical might. That show was fucking dope. I remember one year my dad got me a whole bunch of those fucking figurines and shit, and it was the best thing ever. But I loved all those shows growing up, and they all had something to do with Atlantis, right? So even as a kid growing up, like all this shit was being pummeled into my head, and I had no idea. But here we go. Oh shit, anybody else remember Jason the Wheeled Warriors? That one just popped into my head too. Fucking Jason the Wheeled Warriors. I don't think that one has anything to do with Atlantis or anything. I'm sure we could make some connections if we really wanted to, but that one just popped into my head too. I fucking love that cartoon. And side note here, right? Who the fuck grows up to want to be the bad guy? Every time I see a Cobra symbol or the Decepticon symbol, now, it probably shouldn't, but it fucking pisses me off. I start judging people's parents and shit, the whole fucking nine. Like, what kind of paint chips were you feeding these little fucking window lickers that made them glorify the villains, And then it just kind of makes me sad because people like to be horrible pieces of shit. And some use flags, and some use really passive-aggressive, nerdy flags, like a fucking Decepticon symbol. And I just want all of you to know that I think you're all some racist assholes, and you can go suck a tailpipe with all these flag-flying, the South will rise again, sister-wife, uncle-daddy pieces of shit. Fuck. Super sidetracked there, but really, that one really does get me all messed up, because to me, it's like the Confederate flag for nerds, And I hope all of you now view it like that. And I hope any of you assholes that have one of them on your car fucking take it off and put an Autobot symbol on that bitch like you should have in the first place. God damn. Now, we can't forget Disney's Atlantis, right? That was and still is one of my favorite Disney movies. Especially can't forget Keita, right? Oh, now why I say as a young boy I'd catch a fever looking at the gams on that trollop. That movie is awesome. And actually, that includes most major ideas concerning these lost people from a forgotten land. There have been so many instances where we travel to Atlantis within our pop culture. Shit, didn't even Rick and Morty go there and break off some mermaids with a solid albacore, And they even show Atlantis' location on maps in the Avengers and in 10,000 BC. And I know in the Marvel shit they're just teasing for Namor, but did you know that he's actually the oldest Marvel hero that has never had any on-screen representation? There were efforts to get shit going, but it always fell through. But I think Marvel just got some of the rights for Namor, but I think Universal still holds a lot of the distribution rights, which I think is what's holding the whole thing up. But as far as 10,000 BC is concerned, I tried to watch that dumpster fire like 5 fucking times and I couldn't make it through. I would rather watch an actual dumpster fire than watch 10,000 BC fucking horrible movie, right? But now, in pop culture, Atlantis has always been in one of two places. They're either protected underwater by their advanced technology or underground where they flourished and survived due to their technology. And all of this is just science fiction, right? Or is it? It is a common theory that there are some massive missing links within Earth's timeline, and they do believe that there are missing continents. Could Atlantis and the land that it was located on be that very missing link? Could our obsession with Atlantis be something more? It's easy to see why a writer would want to fantasize about Atlantis, no? I mean, the possibilities are endless as to what it could be, or what could have happened, or what they could have been, and they will and keep pumping out new shit, And I wonder what the theory of Atlantis will be after us, Would it maintain as it has, or would our interference and influence in our age change or alter its story for those to come? Or do we actually find Atlantis? Or for an even more controversial take, have we already found Atlantis, right? And this is all something we're going to get into. But for right now, there are 7 theories about what actually happened to Atlantis, more or less, right? So let's take a look at them. First, we start with the main one. The most commonly held belief is that it simply sunk into the ocean after a massively devastating event, right? And now the most commonly held belief is that Atlantis is located around the coast of Spain and Portugal, or somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, as stated in Plato's writings. Something I didn't know here is that the Spanish coin has depicted the Pillars of Heracles draped in a banner, right? And they had this on their coin forever and ever. And that's actually where we get the money symbol from, right? From a drape on the Pillars of Heracles off of a Spanish coin. Now, the Pillars of Heracles, they're often depicted as columns being held up by Hercules. And these are the Rock of Gibraltar and Cape Mons that flank the Strait of Gibraltar. And, mythology and all that shit, they work it up as columns and whatever and whatnot. And in the long run, that ends up giving us the fucking money symbol. Really cool little piece of interesting information right there. Now, there's also another version of Atlantis' disappearance, and that's that it was gobbled up or it sank off around the Bermuda Triangle. And that's why that area is all fucking spooky and crazy the way that it is. And supposedly, they find shit and then it's constantly, instantly refuted. I didn't focus too much on it because that area tends to lie more in the paranormal area, and I want to try to remain as tangible as we can. But that actually covers 2 theories, right? Because Bermuda isn't really in the common association. So that's 1 and 2. The third hypotenuse is that it's actually located in fucking Antarctica, and it was pulled out of place by a pole shift. Interesting fact here, the magnetic pole is moving at 25 miles a year, the fastest it's ever moved fucking in ever. And I think we're 7,700, it's been 700,000 years or something like that since our last magnetic pole flip, and that's almost double the amount of time that it normally happens. And supposedly the pole is even moving at an even quicker rate, and they have to keep readjusting all the GPS shit. Pretty freaky shit to actually look at and learn about and look up. Look that shit up. The magnetic pole is moving at 25 miles every year, and it's actually racing towards Siberia. And there's a bunch of reasons for that because of this dark magnetic flow flux shit, but not to get sidetracked. I just wanted to throw that little tidbit in there, is that there's this whole theory that the poles flipped, and that's what pulled Antarctica way out of position, and Antarctica was once maybe over there, but now here we are with facing another time where our magnetic pole is racing in a whole nother direction, or is racing out of place, right? This whole shit, it's unheard of. Look that shit up. It's crazy. But we're going to get more into that whole theory in a little while. Now, the 4th theory is that it was in ancient Greece, and that's because they found an ancient ruin there that is out of place, so to speak. The culture that lived there, they called the Minoans, and they were super advanced in relation to ancient Greece, but they would have been there around 2500 BCE, and that is well after the time of, Atlantean destruction given by Plato. And now, 5th up, the Black Sea flood. Now, I can see why this would be hypothesized, but, supposedly the Atlanteans, supposedly Atlantis was created by Poseidon for his wife Cleito, and he raised this land out in the sea away from mortal men, and I find that description to probably hold more meaning and be more accurate as to its location. If we were to look at floodlands, that would open up so many doors and we would be here forever, although I am sure that we would find some really fucking cool shit along the way. Now, the last theory is that this whole thing is just some fakakta bullshit made up story. And now, the fake news scenario is a likely one, but I have reasons to disbelieve that, and we're going to go over all of that and more, but let's wrap this up first, and then we can get into all that after the break. Now, the main reason that they think it's fake is because we haven't discovered it yet, and that shit pisses me off because so many things were considered to be bullshit until they were actually discovered, and this keeps happening over and over and over again. I mean, we're talking about thousands, if not more years, in a devastating event that swallowed up continents in a fucking day. You know, and in case you don't know, Atlantis was fucking ginormous. It wasn't like just an island. This was like a big chunk of fucking land. And furthermore, their architecture was on point. That shit was on par with ancient Egypt, and that has withstood a millennia of natural disasters. And I only say that because if Atlantis was in fact real, the force required to fuck that place up would had to have been significant. Whatever the case may be, though, Atlantis is very much a hot topic right now. Just look at how much Atlantis lives on in our own culture. You know, and on top of that, we see how it's a story that's been around for a wicked long time. You know, and because it's such an old story, when it comes to the topic, there is a lot of over-the-top shit that we could get into in regards to Atlantis. You know, and I'm trying to keep it together here too and not fall into the deep end, so to speak, with this episode. But man, it's hard not to just want to cannonball right into that murky water and start getting into all that fucking wacky occult shit. And I mean just the occult and myth stuff too, not the fucking ancient aliens bullshit where every single fucking thing is aliens, you know? But let's get into the break today and hear from our fake sponsor, and then when we come back, we'll get into all the stories and where they came from. We'll talk about some new discoveries and look at how all of this connects to all of our research up to this point in like some weird fucking way. So let's get into the break and we'll dive into this shit when we get back, alright? Oh, hey there. My name's Flint McClintoff, the purveyor of Flint McClintoff's almond nut butter, the best and most finest lavish cream to provide you, yourself, with the most sumptuous results to all your natural body organs. Never again shall your special or vital parts find that they have been chapped and scorched as the earth under a hot sun. No, not with Flint McClintoff's almond nut butter. When you got a dry feeling, get that nut healing. Flint McClintoff's. Man, we gotta get some real sponsors, right? If you want your very own wacky commercial to promote your business here on BLSS, please reach out to me on Facebook at Want Some Spook and we can talk. Until that day, though, we're gonna have to keep making up some real random shit like you just heard. So now, let's get into it, right? The first written account of Atlantis comes from Plato. Now, Plato was an Athenian philosopher and teacher in ancient Greece. He was a student of the great Socrates and also the teacher of Aristotle. Without question, he is considered to be the father of Western philosophy. Plato was, to put it mildly, a philosophical fucking monster, right? He paved the way for so much in his time, all the way up to our whole fucking democracy that we have right now. Now, on that note, right, ancient Greece has always fascinated me. The gods, the stories, the human problems that the gods themselves went through, you know, it's like Marvel, but in history, and the fights between the realms of gods and men have always had a special place in my heart. This whole thing is like actually the hook that got Marvel its success, you know? These perfect superheroes, they suffered from very human problems, right? Just like the Greek gods. You know, they would struggle with vanity and lust. Some of them would lose sight of what was important and pay dear prices for that. And all of this type of stuff was unheard of up until that point in 1939 with the debut of Prince Namor and the Human fucking Torch. You know, that had the same effect on me as a child as the Greek gods had on me when I grew up and started learning about history. It was just so fucking fascinating, you know, because they were relatable and they were flawed. You know, they made mistakes, they made amends, you know, and it's no wonder I have about 7 fucking trunks of comic books and totes and cards and collectibles. You know, I have Plato's books. I have all of this shit. I have so much shit. It's been years and a day since I've read any of it, but I have it still. And thank God for my lovely lady because she hasn't made me throw any of it out. She's been very kind in supporting that side of my nerddom. So all you ladies out there, you know, support your man's inner geek. Better for him to be at home being a geek than out on the streets being a freak, all right? Remember that shit. But you heard that shit here first on BLSS, motherfuckers. I got your back, guys. Now, back to Plato. One of the reasons I also really dug Plato was because he hated politicians in all the backhanded ways that came with being a politician, and he comments on it a lot, and he refused multiple positions in politics multiple times. He hated all that closed doors bullshit and all the self-serving gluttony that came with it, and he also felt that all these ethical experts were full of shit because they had no fucking idea of what it even meant. They had no capacity for justice, beauty, and equality due to their vanity and self-serving nature, as Plato put it. And it's crazy to see his complaints be the real complaints that we still fucking have today. Now, as far as Plato, he didn't see himself as a politician. Instead, he believed that his position was to enlighten the people beyond the common pitfalls that he could see that were constantly corrupting his nation. Plato believed that in order to understand the one, a person would have to be in harmony with the 3 points of the soul, and the 3 points being reason, spirit, and appetite, right? Plato also had a ton of discussions on political philosophy, cosmology, theology, aesthetics, and so on. And I think it's kind of funny here to envision him as a bit of a diva and being all snarky because he's having a really bad hair day and someone spilled wine on his favorite toga or some shit. Plato, what is wrong? What is going on with you?
No, get away, I don't want to talk. I'm having a very bad day. I can't get my girls right. Somebody spilled wine on my favorite toga. It's horrible. Fucking curse the gods. Don't want to be here. I want to go home.
Aside from whatever his vanity was like, right? He did create the first school for higher learning, and where he taught Socratic law and Platonic philosophy. Platonic philosophy is very different from a Platonic relationship because Platonic philosophy is actually fucking real. Platonism, as it's called, is where an abstract object is an object that does not exist in space or time. Therefore, it's entirely non-physical and non-mental. It's the perfect idea of something, not the actual thing. Because the actual thing isn't perfect. Can't be. The idea can be, but the actual thing can't be. Now, whereas your girlfriend's platonic friend's Tim's penis is an abstract object that does not exist inside of her Schrodinger yet. You picking up what I'm putting down? Yeah, all right. So now the legend has it that Plato in his 70s took a journey to Venice, and while in Venice, he met some interesting Egyptians. And these Egyptians hit Plato to Atlantis while Gandalf lit them up with the finest pipe weed from Middle Earth, And so they're kicking it, right? And the Egyptians start to tell Plato about Atlantis.
My friend, we have a cool story I think you will like on our temple walls.
What the fuck are you doing? Shut the fuck up, man.
No, you shut up. He's cool, man. He's all right. Don't worry. He's not going to tell anyone, man. Calm down.
Oh, he's not going to tell anyone.
On the pyramids and the walls, my friend, we have.
Pass that shit over here.
Wait. What was I saying to you again, my friend? I forgot. Hold on 1 second, man. Fuck.
You're an idiot.
I believe we are talking about Atlantis. Holy fuck, my friend. Holy shit, dude. I totally fucking forget. Okay, right? You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it. All right? Listen. Linda, listen.
Plato then takes this knowledge with him back to Athens sometime around 350 BC. And then 10 years or so later, he writes a story called Timaeus. Now, before I get into what he said in the story, I want to reiterate that Plato did have a big disgust for those in power, especially after they executed his friend and mentor Socrates. So when he wrote Timaeus, there was an agenda, or at least so the people of the time and for fucking ever would think. And now we're going to break down the story, and we're going to put it in terms of the Egyptians talking to Plato instead of the actual characters talking in the story, right? So, according to the Egyptians, there was once this mighty power that existed somewhere off in the Atlantic. It was a massive island surrounded by mountains. 3 concentric circles of water were formed around the great city, and it had one massive path as the only way in or out, right? And the Atlanteans ruled their land and the outlying islands and parts of Africa and Europe. They were a rich, proud, and powerful people, and they were virtuous. That is, up until the point that they fell victim to the dark ways. Now, one day, Atlantis decides to wage war on Athens, and very much like some 300 shit, they fought the giant Atlantean army, but won. And although Athens would be crowned the victor shortly after the battle, disaster would fucking strike, right? And Atlantis, as well as the ancient Athenian soldiers, would all be swallowed up by the ocean in one foul fucking swoop. Hoof, boom, gone. Everybody, bro. Boomba, dead. Fucking disappear, right? And this was to be their punishment for losing their way. And Zeus, the smitiest of smiters, took the whole fucking landmass, bro. Like, not fucking around, man. Zeus doesn't fuck around. They say the story put forth by Plato was meant to be a parable of a great society losing its way and falling to war, not unlike his own nation. Now, while Timaeus is a fictional story, Plato himself always claimed Atlantis to be real. The city of Atlantis was said to be an engineering marvel, not unlike the fabled Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Now, in that, right, the world seems so fucking ready to believe in the gardens as opposed to Atlantis, and both have about the same amount of credibility in terms of actual evidence. There is a stark contrast in between the time frame of these two locations, right? And I will admit that, since the Hanging Gardens were supposedly in existence around 600 BCE, and Atlantis existed much earlier in time. Still, the point here is that historians and archaeological experts tend to cherry pick on what they want to believe in. Now, that's still neither here nor there, right? Now, for instance, the ancient Egyptian city of Heraklion was widely considered to be myth, yet they recently discovered the 1,200-year-old city submerged in the Mediterranean Sea, forcing all these naysayers to eat shit. History is malleable, and like it or not, institutions have been built on maintaining that history rather than expanding on it. And this is a well-fucking-known problem within the scientific community and places all over the fucking world. But I digress. Now, in Homer's Iliad, right, he told the story of the Trojan War, and the location and the story was widely considered to be nothing more than folklore and fable, yet again, it's found. In the Mahabharata, there's a story about how Lord Krishna, following a victory, leaves the city of Dwarka for his palace in the sky before the Arabian Sea then swallows Dwarka whole. It's a story that shares some striking similarities to that of Atlantis, and Dwarka was considered to be no more than myth as well. That is, until 1963, an archaeological investigation discovered Dwarka intact under the sea off the coast of India. Myth and history are proving to be much more intertwined than we ever allowed ourselves to believe, and there's many within the historical community that maintain the belief that this is by design, and I gotta say that it's hard not to agree with them when you really start to look at how hard it is to get new information entered into the mainstream. It's fucking vicious, dude, and if one does not stay committed, they can lose their entire career from the shaming. And I know that sounds ridiculous to some people, but don't take my word for it. Look it up for your fucking selves. If you ever look up anything I ask you to look up the fact that new information is suppressed by the scientific community at large. So at least that way, your own eyes will be opened up by yourself and nobody else telling you what to fucking think, right? I do my best to bring you stuff that you can actually really learn about, stuff that is tangible, although I do throw in my own thoughts here and there, but still, I try to be open and really give you guys something to chew on with your mouth brains. But over and over again, myth and legend turn out to be more than what they seem to be. And I think the main problem with Atlantis is that any of the people that may have been associated with them in our recorded history came after the fall of this supposed first golden age, right? Now, these people are often looked at as the Atlanteans, but I believe them to be nothing more than the descendants of Atlantis. Because in the stories, the Atlanteans come from across the sea to wage war in which they lose, right? Now, from that, they settled in areas around Portugal, Spain, and Africa. Now, the whole MO of that feels like, at the very least, to just conquer a new land to fucking live on. Not out of some imperialistic impulse, you know what I mean? Especially when you take into account Plato's telling of the age that it happened in, And one thing that doesn't happen is you don't come to wage a fucking war, lose, and then move in. Why the fuck would they come here, wage war, and be like, oh, well, you know what, fucking, I guess we're neighbors now. Some fucking odd couple bullshit. But, whatever. Now, in Plato's story, Critias says that he heard the story from Solon, who had heard it from an Egyptian priest who said that this all happened 9,000 years before their meeting. The Athenian statesman Solon was fucking real, and he had existed 300 years before Plato. If you add that up on top of the time it's been since Plato existed, you get roughly somewhere around 1,300 years, right smack dab in the middle of a cataclysmic event that rapidly melted the ice caps and caused catastrophic floods all across the globe. And this is why every culture has a flood myth. It's not because God is great and he left his fingerprint on every fucking living soul. It's because the fucking sky fell and absolutely destroyed every single thing across the Atlantic. Literally, 70 to 80% of the Americas were wiped out during a cataclysmic event. That all fits in with Plato's timeline. Now, if this was a story held in some ancient Egyptian oral tradition, or if it was in fact real and carved into what I can only imagine is a lost temple, then why wouldn't the Egyptians share it with Plato, right? He himself followed Hermeticism in the Three Pillars just as Thoth and or Hermes taught, so these guys would have been Theo bros, especially after 3 or 4 bowls from the fucking hookah. And again, I'm not any kind of smarty boy, but just looking at things, it would not be too hard to see why and how such a conversation could take place between someone like the father of fucking philosophy and some super chill Egyptian priest that just so happened to kick it with the White Widow wizard. All in all, I think Plato's story, given to him by the Egyptians and given to the Egyptians by Thoth, is of a golden age, and it comes before the cataclysm. We are talking about massive ice sheets breaking off and rapidly melting from meteors hitting North America. The energy outbursts from these impacts set everything on fire for hundreds of fucking years, too. This was like an etch-a-sketch to human history all across the globe. Whole swaths of land were either rapidly submerged or rocked to pieces due to isostatic depression and earthquakes. The best way to explain isostatic depression to you guys is to picture a waterbed. If you push down on one end of the bed, it rises in others, right? Then when you remove your pressure off the bed, the waterbed is going to return to some kind of equilibrium. Only the Earth's crust isn't as free-flowing, it's more like a system of seesaws on top of the waterbed, so to speak, so when one area goes up, another one goes down, and vice versa. There's always some kind of equivalent movement that's happening within the Earth's crust, And this led me to look at the North Atlantic Ridge, which runs right underneath the Azores, and they recently found what seems to be a 20,000-year-old pyramid, right? And what I think happened here is that there was a much larger landmass that was part of the ancient world, just as the Great Pyramids and the Sphinx are, and these things are much, much older than we originally thought they were, and so I think what happened at some point is that possibly due to isostatic depression, the North Atlantic Ridge opened right the fuck up and swallowed a whole landmass and anything that was right there along them, and especially when you look at the Azorean Islands, some of them look stretched and drawn out like land blades, and land blades are created by immensely heavy flows of water that fucking just cut through the earth as it races by, so there very well could have been a landmass there at one point for all we know. I mean, we still truly don't understand how plate tectonics work. We have an idea, but all of it is still just theory. Now, when it comes down to the whole thing, personally, I'm on Team Forgotten Age. It seems like what we call Atlantis is just something from a previous age or era of beings that lived on Earth a long, long time ago. A whole civilization that we forgot about, but still somehow have proof of them existing, The new evidence of water erosion on the Sphinx places it way fucking older than we initially thought it to be, And then we have those newly found 20,000-year-old pyramids under the Azores, all over the world. There's images of people that could fly, and many of them, they're holding the same type of thing in their hand, whether it's a Mesopotamian statue or a fucking depiction of Thoth holding the Ankh, And there's that most famous image of the Aztec king Quetzalcoatl and his supposed ship. And then there's the golden airplanes they found in the tombs in Egypt. Or just about every fucking depiction of some asshole with wings on his back or feet, There's all these stories of people that seem to have existed that could do more than we could even imagine, flying across the sky in their golden chariots and whatever and whatnot, And all these stories permeate every part of our mythos across almost every fucking culture. Now, in the myths, they want to chalk this up to gods and angels, and then there's a lot of fucking nuts that want to chalk this up to being aliens, but I want to believe that there's a more human or terrestrial element to all of these things that have gone on over the millennia. As per usual, though, that is not to say that there wasn't any kind of intervention by unknown forces way, way back. I am a believer of fucking aliens and shit, but I'm not a firm believer of aliens being as big of an involvement as people seem to really want to believe. And now, nothing is impossible, nothing, and when you look at the shit that could very well have happened on this planet over millions and millions of years, the possibilities are endless. Now, if Atlantis did exist, it could have very well been right above the North Atlantic Ridge. And it could have very much have been swallowed up due to the change of the equilibrium of the Earth's surface and so on, Or it could have been ripped to a different location altogether during violent changes to the Earth's surface and polar shifts. As far as we know, there are no other writings about Atlantis from the ancient world other than Plato's. In the mythical writings on what we can only assume are walls in some lost Egyptian temple, right? After Plato's time, though, the world would carry on for thousands of years, and while the world continued on, Atlantis would fall by the wayside, And the short of it is that the world was in discovery mode, and by discovery, I mean the spread of Christianity and Islam. This was a period that laid waste to so much knowledge of the old world and things that we can only fucking imagine. During the Inquisitions and all of that shit, dude, they fucking torched all kinds of fucking documents and destroyed all kinds of monuments, anything. In the same way like what these radicals and terrorists do out in the Middle East, where they're fucking destroying all these temples and beautiful works of art. One of the things that's fucked up too is like if you go back like way back and look at how beautiful the Middle East was before this past 100 years of fucking just devastation, it is devastating to look at how fucking gorgeous the Middle East used to be, and now it's just bombed the fuck out, dude. It's crazy to look at that shit. It's heartbreaking, but it's a very good example of what has happened over the millennia. Fuck your gods, fuck your people, fuck everything about you. We're gonna wipe you from existence. That was like a whole big threat back in the day. You know what I mean? You and your bloodline, we will wipe you all out. And we've done that over and over with our story, and willingly. We can see it happening right now. So it's not like hard to fathom how even certain things could have just been forgotten by us due to our own fucking ignorance. And then we come out of that period into the Renaissance, which leads to the Industrial Revolution, and then that brings us up to about the 1900s. And the inventors ruled the day during that time, right? The mind was now open to all the possibilities, And once humans began to grace the sky, our perspective changed so much, man. And then fucking bang, there's a boom in Atlantis books. The break in the proverbial dam came from French writer Charles Etienne Brasseur de Babbage. Did I say that right? Probably not. Charles Etienne Brasseur de Babbage. Etienne Brasseur de Babbage. Blah. From a French writer, Charles Etienne Brasseur de Babbage. And that name always reminds me of that old ATM commercial from the 90s, where the rich white people are stranded somewhere in the desert and some fucking little kid comes running over and he's like, ATM, fix everything. I don't even know how old I was when I saw that commercial, but it has been stuck with me for the past 30 goddamn years, Well, Etienne most certainly did fix everything, and he did this by taking into account all the new information at hand, right? So Charles Etienne Brasseur de Babbage was a historian, archaeologist, and specialist in Mesoamerican studies, right? He spent a massive amount of time in the Americas where he studied the Mayans and the Aztec civilizations. Babbage was a great writer, and it got him noticed at a very young age. He wrote many novels and was ordained into Catholic priesthood when he turned 30. And this is something that he would very much use to his advantage, since the church itself hoards vast amount of information, not accessible to the outside world, that is, And so he was dispatched to Canada, and he fucking hated it, due in part to the weather and due in part to some of his writings on the first Roman Catholic bishop of Quebec. And as we went over earlier, established ideologies do not like contending ideas, and Quebec most certainly didn't like Etienne's bullshit. And around this time, he started a series of lectures that were immediately shut down for an unknown reason. And we don't really know what the lectures were about either, but we can kind of get a feel for what kind of guy Etienne was. But at some point, Babbage decides that he's had enough of Canada and comes down to motherfucking Beantown, baby. And Boston apparently loved Babbage, right? And he ended up rising through the ranks of the church, becoming a vicar. And it seems like whatever research and thoughts that he was having in Canada, they were well received out here. And at some point, he gathered up all he felt he could here. And then, with that, he decides to return to Europe to hit that sweet, sweet Vatican vault for all that info out in Rome and Madrid. 2 years later, after the vicar got what he again needed, he left for Central America, where he truly began his work. Now, between 1848 and 1862, he traveled all over Mexico and Central America, armed with the knowledge that he had gathered, and he began to try to decipher the ancient world. Now, by 1862, he published the, let's see if I can say it in French, Grammaire de la langue quiche. or the grammar of the Quiche language. Boom, that was one fucking take. Sweet. In which he says he believes Plato's words, and he goes on to show how Persian and European words could be traced all the way back to the Americas. Now, Boborge believed that the old world and the new world were once in constant communication. And if you look this up, it's pretty fucking crazy at how there are distinct phonetic features that seem to appear on complete opposite sides of the earth. And the people that speak this way couldn't be more fucking different, which is a trip. You know, and I believe, I do, it really makes me believe in this whole thought process when you look at Etienne's work, at how at some point, you know, we were connected on a deeper level than we know right now, that any of us can remember right now, because this is just ancient shit. But anyway, right now, then, in 1866, he got to examine a Mayan codex that was in the possession of a paleontologist in Madrid. And after review, he published the Monuments of Ancient Mexico, where he clearly finds distinct commonalities between the Old and New World, and further makes a case for Atlantis as being the link in between the two. His last article was published in 1871, titled Chronologie historique des Mexicains. Did I say that right? It was a historical timeline of Mexico which detailed 4 periods of world cataclysms that began in 10,500 BCE from shifts from the Earth's axis and its magnetic fields. Now, Boborge in his time was considered to be a fucking lunatic, but today his research has proven to be invaluable, and his time frames fit perfectly with Plato's. Even without Atlantis in the picture, there is still a connection between the eastern and western hemispheres that seems to predate any known interactions between the fucking two hemispheres. Etienne's work built the foundations for so many people to come, right? Now, next up, right, in 1871, another man with a stupendously long name also wrote about Atlantis. Edward George Earl Lytton Belwer Lytton, first Baron Lytton, if you please. And he was an English writer and politician who coined the phrase, "The pen is mightier than the sword." He is also the man responsible for the opening phrase on a dark and stormy night, something that would be used by campfires to scare children for hundreds of years to come. Yes. Mr. Bullwinkle Lighton also coined the phrase, Mr. Bulwer Lytton also coined the phrase, "in the pursuit of the almighty dollar." Pretty impressive, this guy, right? While not just the cock of coxswain, he also put the worth in Wordsworth. Yes, for he also wrote a book called The Coming Race. And it was about a man who was exploring a chasm while visiting a friend. And the main character is unnamed, yes. But he and his friend traverse deeper and deeper into the chasm, where hence their rope breaks and they both tragically fall. The friend then dies, and the unnamed man somehow makes it out of the ordeal, able to continue on true to his ancient blood. For then he travels deeper and deeper underground, unto which he discovers a people that are called the Vril. Sound familiar? Perhaps it may, yes. All right, and they themselves are descendants of the Atlanteans, right? And they tell him that they had to flee the surface due to an impending flood, and being underground in harsh conditions forced them to evolve, right? And beyond that, they're telepathic, almost angelic in appearance, and they have advanced technology. And the story goes on too. And if you just want a quick rundown, check out the wiki. That's what I checked out for it. But check it out. The story is really, really crazy. And in large part, it would serve as the basis for the previously mentioned Disney movie, Atlantis: The Lost World. Now, after Edward Earl Earlington comes a woman by the name of Helena Blavatsky. And her story is fucking wild. She was from Mother Russia and co-founded the Theosophical Society in New York City in 1875. And I got to insist you pull up their logo because, again, these all fucking connects. In 1888, she published A Secret Doctrine, where she makes claims of a master race that exists on this planet and it's forgotten, and claims to have discovered this information from Tibetan Buddhist monks. In her writing, she claims that there was once an ancient race of people that lived on a continent in the Atlantic Ocean. She says that these people were the ancestors to the ancient American natives 1,000,000 years ago. According to her, there were originally 12 races. The Atlantean root race was the predecessor of our own Aryan race, also called Indo-Caucasian. She goes on to describe Atlantis as the great continent, the father of nearly all present continents, and states that the destruction, flooding, and submergence of its last remaining portions occurred 11,444 years ago when its last island was taken by the Earth, again lining up with Plato. Looking at that 20,000-year-old structure in the Azores, I really feel like maybe that was the scene of this last battle that we went over, right? Where the land got swallowed up along with the soldiers. I mean, it all kind of fits, and it's so perfect. It's right above the Atlantic Ridge. And that would make sense more, too, for that being the last colony, the last vestige of an old world. It makes sense, doesn't it? Right? I don't know. I mean, I don't fucking know. I don't know. But I mean, I've just done a whole bunch of reading about it, and some of it just makes sense, and some kind of leaps and bounds you can make pretty easily just because of the information makes it so naturally come together. But again, back to Madame Blavatsky. The masters that educated Madame Blavatsky said, and I quote, "The Atlanteans had many luxuries and conveniences. Their capital city was called the City of the Golden Gates, and at its height, it had 2 million inhabitants. Also, the Atlanteans had airships powered by this real power that could seat up to 8 people." And right away when I was reading this shit, like the first thing that popped into my head was all that stuff that we went over about the Nazis and the Vril and their crafts and the Jaeger fighters and the Honeyboo series and shit. And here we are with this lady writing those exact words that were coming out of the Nazi regime, right? But let's continue on, right? The economic system of the Atlanteans was socialist, just like that of the Incas. The Atlanteans were said to be the first to develop organized warfare. The Toltecs on Atlantis worshipped the sun in temples as grand as those of the ancient Egyptians and were decorated in bright colors. She says that the Toltecs colonized all of North America and South America and thus became the people that we know as the Amerindians. Madame Blavatsky says that the downfall of Atlantis started when some of the Toltecs began to practice black magic and were corrupted by the dragon Thevata or Devadatta, who happens to be the opponent of Buddha. She goes deep into Atlantis. And if you really want to read some wild fucking shit, look her up, man. Madame Blavatsky. That's Blavatsky in the Y. What does that spell? Vodka. No, I'm just kidding. It's Madame Blavatsky. But you understand, right? You get humor. You're funny people, right? Okay, back to your Jim. But yeah, no, man. Madame Blavatsky and the Secret Doctrine. Look it up, right? And after looking her up, it really looks like somebody in Germany was paying attention to her shit, Oh, all of these wonderful works of writing, yeah. Oh, I think maybe someone else wants to read about this too, yeah. Oh, mein Führer! Oh, mein Führer! Now, next up is a man named Ignatius Donnelly who wrote Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, and he also wrote Ragnarok, the Age of Fire and Gravel. This fucking dude already sounds awesome just from the books that he wrote, right? Like, such cool fucking names for his books. Ignatius basically built on the thought of all those that came before him. And in Atlantis, the antediluvian world, he agrees to the massive missing continent and concurs that Plato's words were true and Atlantis was in fact a real place. But he goes on with it, right? He believed that all the old myths were in fact true. The Garden of Eden, the Gardens of Hesperides, the Elysian Fields, the Gardens of Alcinous, the Mesomphalos, the Olympos, and Asgard. He believed all that shit was real, and that it represented a universal memory of a great land where early mankind dwelt for ages. That the gods and goddesses of these ancient Greeks, Phoenicians, Hindus, and Scandinavians were simply the kings and queens and heroes of Atlantis, and that the acts attributed to them in mythology are all just a confused recollection of real historical events. Ignatius believed that Egypt and Peru's religion was based on the original Atlantean religion as well, and that Egypt was one of the oldest colonies of the Atlanteans. Now, I'm also on team the Egyptians just moved into that shit. I'm not on the team Egyptians built that shit, because the Egyptians have no fucking idea how that shit was built. Nobody has any idea. If you built that shit, if you had people built that shit, you'd be able to give a better explanation to fucking, we just threw mad Jews at it, bro. Like, what do you mean you don't understand? Like, what? Like, math? What do you mean math, bro? Fucking Jews. Dude, just throw Jews. Whatever you need, man. Just throw Jews at it and fucking bang, dude. Pyramids. What are you talking about? Like, it's fucking ridiculous, So I am on team, at some point something happened and the Egyptians moved in and we're like, fucking nice fucking digs, dude. Like, this is pretty fucking dope. And just built their whole fucking culture off of it. But again, I'm getting sidetracked with stupid shit. Now, Ignatius also, he says another word, man, that just comes up so much with Atlantis, the original seat of the Aryan people, right? Like, we just keep hearing Aryan, Vril, like so many key phrases that have to do with Atlantis come up so much in all of the Nazi stuff. But I'm getting ahead of myself. And then finally, he also states that after the cataclysms, the people of Atlantis fled on boat and raft the best they could, and what they carried with them was the tale of the deluge. Now, in his second book, Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Gravel, he agrees that a comet hit Earth approximately 12,000 years ago, right? This is now known to be true. Now, at the time, this shit wasn't believed. This whole comet idea was totally unfounded, good sir. Harumph, I say. But at the end of the day, it actually turns out to be true, right? In his second book, Ragnarok, The Age of Fire and Gravel, he agrees that a comet hit the Earth approximately 12,000 years ago, and it caused widespread fires, floods, poisonous gases, and unusually vicious and prolonged winters. The catastrophe destroyed a much more advanced civilization, forcing its terrified population to seek shelter in caves. In a situation like this, there are no homes that can protect you. You have to run into caves and those types of structures because the world's on fucking fire and raining down upon you, you know? Donnelly further postulates that as cave dwellers, they lost all knowledge of art, literature, music, philosophy, and engineering. And he goes on to say that many legends and myths from various cultures, such as the Zoroastrians, the Pictish, Hindu, and ancient Grecian, all suggest a comet struck the Earth caught fire, and floods and tidal waves destroyed large areas. And he also says that early cultures have a tendency to heliotheism, or sun worship, in which he stated to evolve from a gratitude towards the sun after so many horrific days without it. And I could see that. You know, I don't know if that's what it is or not, but I could see that. You know, this is fact. You know, this comet hit, and it burnt North America and Central America to almost a fucking crisp. And that fucked the world up for like almost 2,000 years, you know, or somewhere like 1,500 years. It was just devastation, you know, rains and cloudy skies, you know, like picture that whole shit from The Matrix, you know, we know it was us who first blackened the sky. You know, it's that shit. And then one day, you know, here comes the sun, you know, do 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 do. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, I don't know if it's true or not. At least his theory is a rational thought process to the whole idea, right? Now, this brings us to a professor named Charles Xavier. No, to a professor named Charles Hapgood, who by happenstance ends up on his own search for Atlantis after challenging his students to find the lost continent of Mu, or Atlantis. And I gotta say that after all we've gone over up to this point of the entirety of the show, things keep linking together. And Charles Hapgood is another one of those people because his background and everything lines up too perfectly for what he ended up searching for, especially given what we already know, right? So Hapgood was considered to be a pseudoscientist, right? And he lived on the fucking outskirts of Atlantis research in his later years. But before we get to his end, I want to look at his start, right? Before he was a professor or a pseudoscientist, Hapgood worked in intelligence for the OSS, or Office of Strategic Services, right? And he also worked as a liaison between the White House and the Secretary of War during World War II. Now, after the war is when he becomes a professor and then all of a sudden decides to challenge his students to find this lost continent. And somehow, this ends up making Hapgood go looking for Atlantis himself. You know, it does bear mentioning, too, that Hapgood had his master's degree in medieval and modern history, right? Now, Hapgood is the one who came up with that theory that we talked about before about the pole shifting and how that has dramatic and sudden changes amongst the Earth's continents. And he wrote about it in great length in the Earth's Shifting Crust, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, and Path of the Pole. And all of his work pointed to a point where Antarctica was much further north and ice-free. In all of these ancient maps, there was a landmass that resembled an ice-free Antarctica. And this led Hapgood to postulate that Antarctica is Atlantis. And since that time of the last cataclysm, it has been under immense layers of ice and permafrost, you know? But during his time, he was ridiculed and regarded by no one, fucking no one. And Hapgood's theories are only recently turning out to be possibly accurate. Nowadays, almost everybody thinks that something's in Antarctica. Towards the end of his life, though, Hapgood went full-out New Age, trying to contact Atlanteans or any other antediluvian race, of which, again, there were supposedly 12. Now, Hapgood would fall into obscurity towards the end of his life, and he would end up being struck and killed by a car near his home in Greenfield, Mass. On December 21st, 1982. Hapgood's work is now widely regarded and prominently featured in many new pieces of work. Graham Hancock himself references Hapgood's research extensively and also agrees that Atlantis may very well be in Antarctica. The thing that struck me the most while researching and writing this episode is how much of this called back to the past episodes, I mean, really all of them. But I'll leave that on the fringe for another time, And another thing that this episode has reinforced is that so much of what is going on is like super fucking terrestrial, We want aliens to be a part of our story so bad, but what if all of this, the lasers, the Velcro, the spaceships, the cell phones, what if all of this has just already happened before, and we're just reliving these patterns over and over again? I mean, shit, didn't they recently find a hammer encapsulated in a fossil that's dated to be something like fucking 5 million years old? I mean, there's so much that we can't explain, and so we want to always chalk it up to wild shit, but the reality is that science and history and geology and anthropology and archaeology can't explain things because they refused tons and tons of information. And this is all going to get to a point where the mainstream is going to have no choice but to accept this information, right? Another wild thing here is that all of the Vril and the occult shit that was intertwined with the Nazi party. Remember they had Maria Orsic that was supposedly talking to this master race and her organization was called the Vril? And remember how in the Tesla episode I brought up all those researchable UFOs? All of these episodes, all of this shit, all links to Atlantis. Madame Blavatsky said that they had ships that could carry from 2 to 8 people powered by the Vril. The Nazis developed the Vril and Rendezvous craft that could sit 2 to 8 people. Madame Blavatsky said that the masters in Tibet knew about the old world and Atlantis, and the Nazis went to Tibet in search of the master race. And they went pretty much everywhere that Madame Blavatsky was talking about, as if they were using all of these books as research notes, just like I did for this episode. And then finally, they went looking for Atlantis in Antarctica, and supposedly they found it. I mean, that's if you want to believe the acting president of Germany after Hitler offed himself. President Karl Donitz said at the Nuremberg trials that they had discovered an impenetrable fortress made of ice and stone surrounded by lakes and mountains underground. And then you have Admiral Byrd, who supposedly gets sucked into a giant hole during Operation High Jump, in which he went missing for up to 3 hours. And he echoed exactly what Donitz said, and exactly what Edward Bulwer-Lytton wrote in his book, The Coming Race. Now, everything that we've gone over up until this point is painting some kind of a picture, and we're going to keep going with this show to see what all of this actually means. I feel like I'm onto something in some weird way, shape, or form, and I hope you guys see it too. And I really, really enjoy that my research points to humans actually being fucking amazing, only having very minimal interaction with outside entities, if in fact those interactions ever did happen at all. Now, the closer you look, the more you see that we may very well have been close to godlike in a previous age. Images of humans in spacesuits, multiple depictions and stories of humans flying, and I'm going to call them human whether or not they were classified as gods, And then on top of that, you got to think that maybe this world was once very, very different. And maybe, even long, long ago, there were in fact many different races that once inhabited this planet. And that is so fucking crazy. To think that what if there are no aliens and there are no gods? One, it's just us reliving this history over and over again to varying degrees, and due to cataclysmic events, we have continually lost our knowledge of the past. All that lives on are these stories that got twisted and bent due to the struggles of our people that they went through trying to survive all of these events. And I fucking love it. It gets me all fired up to think that this is lost history, and furthermore, to think that this history is involving every bit of our mythos to varying degrees. A story full of unimaginable feats, mind-numbing creatures, and beings like we've never fucking seen. So what do we take away from all this, guys? What do you take away from all of this? We have 1, that Plato was probably very much telling a true story. We have 2, that every culture has the same story, and that there was a massively devastating event that took place around 13,000 years ago that wiped out over 70% of all life in the Americas. And what did we learn from that as well? We learned that the ancient Egyptian and Grecian cultures came off the back of the old world, for one. Another point we learned is that in the old world, we were in communication with each other as documented by Beaubourg's phonetic research. Next we found out that many people fled underground to escape the floods. And then finally, we learned that Atlantis may very well be what we call Antarctica, and that all of these stories may actually be true. That whole Nazi connection fucks me up, and it's wild. That is wild, and the fact that so much of the UFO phenomena is attributed to the Vril in the ancient texts is fucking trippy. I mean, look at everything that happened during World War II and afterward. The whole UFO connection being terrestrial, coming from ancient texts and inspired by imagination, and then becoming a reality in some form. And then the Nazis storm Antarctica, and then America goes there and the fucking admiral gets sucked into the earth by some kind of energy, and then they take heavy losses during that operation, which was Operation High Jump. And that operation was put together by James Forrestal, who immediately starts calling for disclosure. And this ends with him voluntarily jumping out of a 16th floor window and dying of apparent coronavirus complications. And then we have the invasion of Washington, D.C. in 1952, where all those UFOs buzzed the White House. And all of this connects together, and I'm not trying to make it connect, but it just does. And the fact that it does is fucking fascinating. And it's gotta mean something. Part of me feels like, from Close Encounters, and I'm just sitting there this means something. Fucking playing with my potatoes and shit. Shit, pop culture already started grabbing onto Antarctica as Atlantis in the late 30s with Prince Namor. And then beyond that, we find remnants of Mars and shit on the moon, and we think that there must be some extraterrestrial phenomenon, but I'm starting to believe and to think that maybe not. Given with all this shit that we see that might be coming out of the earth and all these races that maybe lived here in the past, what if all of that shit was all part of this shit and we were all part of that shit? What if that, instead of all of this fucking ancient aliens bullshit, and that George Tsoukalos and fucking everything, could it be aliens? Yes. And shut the fuck up. What if all of it wasn't? What if there's more wonder to us in our world than there is beyond it? And that's something that I can't not want to think about. And I love the idea that we are more than we ever thought, And I'm really starting to believe, not think that that this was all us from a past life, and all of these stories that we dreamed up in our pop culture are all just fragments of genetic memories, you know what I mean? And we have millions of stories and all these otherworldly advanced civilizations that existed in a far off place and sent out these godlike creatures like Superman and Mega Man, but it seems like all of these are just stories that happened to this planet over and over again, millions and millions of years in the making. I mean, do what you want here, guys, but I gotta suggest that you stop looking up so much and blaming everything on aliens and gods, and start looking down and within, because I think there's so much more to us than we could ever imagine, especially after reading about Atlantis. And there's so much more to this planet than I ever even knew. I mean, but what do you guys think? Did any of this help you understand more about Atlantis? If I'm being honest, I don't really think this answered that many questions for me at all. If anything, I feel like it created more questions, and it made me want to learn more and dive deeper into this topic. But I hope that you guys did take something from this episode and that there was some good information here for you, because this was a really fun episode to work on. And but as it stands right now, right after all that we've gone over, I'm really starting to think that it's under Antarctica, personally. I don't know about you guys, but I'm starting to think that there's really something to Antarctica, and only because of all the coincidences, But I really want to know what you guys think, so get a hold of me on social media, at WatsomSpook, on Facebook and Twitter, at brightlights_scary_shadows on Instagram, and let me know what you think. Let's talk about this, because I don't want to sit here and feel like I'm crazy. I want to hash this out. I want to hear what you guys think. What is some shit that I missed here? I definitely want to go back to Atlantis. I want to revisit this again, but I want to hear from you guys about it as well. I mean, do you want to go into the occult side? Should we dig deeper into the more human side of it? What do you want to hear about Atlantis? Let me know, and that's what we'll do, all right? But that's it for this week's episode. I hope you guys liked it. I know I fucking loved it. And this episode had me in goosebumps almost the whole fucking time I was reading about it, because it was just one thing after another that had me blown away. But again, I hope I didn't miss too much. There are some things I left out for the recap episode and for future episodes that we're working on. But if I got anything wrong, or you want to build on the ideas, again, hit me up on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. But as usual, please don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe, as well as share. That does it for this week. Thank you so much for being here. I hope to see you guys next week. But until then, I hope you are all safe and happy and blessed in life. And this has been another episode of Bright Lights and Scary Shadows.